Well, let's talk now to Gavin Mudd, who's the director of the UK Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre. Welcome to the programme, Gavin. Thanks for joining us. So why has this happened now? Why has China made this move?
Well, I guess there could be multiple reasons, but it's pretty obvious that certainly the US President Trump will be visiting China very soon. So it's part of the broad gamut of geopolitics. But as we've just heard, China certainly has a very commanding position pretty much across the periodic table, like for a lot of the elements that we need for the various technologies, the various sort of concerns that we have, whether it be about digital security, whether it be the energy transition, and national security as well. So I think it's pretty important that we take note of these types of issues.
So do you see it then as some kind of leverage in future US-China trade talks?
Well, I think the policy people, it's a sort of really a focus for them. But what we can see from history is that we've seen from both sides a willingness to engage in trade policy that is where we are now. Like whether it's tariffs, whether it's export controls, we've seen that from both sides, and not just the US and China either. We should say it's actually pretty much across the board. So I think it's part of geopolitics.
So what about the practical effects of this? Are we going to see perhaps a similar supply crunch to the one that we saw when China restricted rare earth exports back in the 2010s?
I think it has very similar hallmarks to the scale of controls that were put in place in 2010, absolutely. The concern will be that means that there's extra time, and that means a lot of delay in securing supplies. That delay will mean increased cost, and so that will be passed on to consumers in some way. How quickly, how much that is, that's really difficult to predict at the moment. But these are the real concerns. We've seen that with the previous controls that have been in place this year and last year as well, is that there can be real-world effects in terms of different companies making sure they have access to the supplies they need. So it's a real concern.
So who's going to suffer the most, do you think? We know that these critical minerals can be used in all kinds of things, from electric vehicles to smartphones, defence. Who's going to feel the pinch first?
First, well, that's a difficult one to predict who might be first. But across the board, we know that anything that uses magnets, especially permanent magnets, such as electric vehicles, wind turbines, magnets are also used in electronics. So a lot of our computer hardware, our digital technologies rely on magnets as well. Then you've got all sorts of other areas that may be affected, because rare earths in particular are used across the spectrum in terms of our modern infrastructure, our modern technologies and so on. So one of the things to remember about a lot of the controls that we're seeing put in place, it's not just about the elements that are being used, and rare earths are about 15 elements of their own, but it's also about the process technology to refine them into the sort of the high purity that we need to make these technologies work. And so it's the combination of both what is the element under control, but then also its process technology, because that's what China, as we heard from the story before, is really perfected. They've invested in that very heavily over decades and been very strategic. They've certainly built their infrastructure and their technology base to be able to deliver these sorts of technologies. And so I think that's something that we also need to keep in mind.
Gavin, great to talk to you today. Thanks so much for coming on the programme. That's Gavin Mudd, the director of the UK Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre.